In modern investing, diversification is almost treated like a commandment. Don't put all your eggs in one basket. Spread your risk. Own a little bit of everything. The logic is simple. If you don't know what's going to win, you hedge your bets. You lower volatility, you reduce downside risk, and in a world of uncertainty, diversification feels wise, prudent, and responsible. But this idea has been challenged forcefully in recent years, most notably by Michael Saylor, who asks this simple question. If you have the best savings technology in the world, why would you not concentrate the fruits of your labor into it? Don't worry, folks, we'll take this biblical in a moment. But first, Saylor points out that diversification is only the best option if you don't know what the best option is. But if one option is clearly superior, it's not diversification, it's not wisdom, it's just dilution. He uses simple analogies. When you sit down, you just pick one chair. You don't diversify across 5 different chairs. You just pick the best one. When engineers design an airplane, they don't diversify the primary structural material. They choose aluminum. They don't say, let's use some aluminum, some wood, some plastic, some steel, some iron. They pick aluminum because it's what works best for the job and what allows the plane to actually fly. When launching a rocket up into space, you don't diversify the fuel sources. You don't say, let's use a little bit of gasoline, a little bit of diesel, a little bit of ethanol, maybe some hydrogen. No, you pick kerosene because that's what allows the rocket to actually get into orbit. Saylor's argument is simple. Diversification is a strategy for ignorance. Concentration is a strategy for conviction. And that tension between diversifying and conviction, it's not just financial. It is deeply biblical. Before we go any further, we need to make a distinction, and not just the fact that I'm not a financial advisor. This is not financial advice. The Bible does not condemn wisdom or prudence when uncertainty is prevalent. Joseph stored grain, and Jesus even tells parables about counting the cost. But what we're talking about here is not productive capital or business risk. We're talking about savings, the long-term storage of the fruits of your labor. Bitcoin is not just another asset. It's a monetary network, a store of value, and a savings technology. Arguably the best one that humanity has ever discovered. If that's true, then diversification away from it isn't safety. It's exposure to other risks. From a biblical lens, money actually reflects values, trust, and belief. Which brings us to the second point. Money is a form of speech. Jesus says, where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Your money speaks before you do, and often more powerfully than you do. It declares that what you believe will last. It declares what you trust to carry your labor through time. And in many cases, diversification becomes less about stewardship and more about fear. Fear of missing out, fear of being wrong, and fear of standing alone. If your money is spread thin across systems that reward leverage, debt, financialization, rent-seeking, what moral statement are you actually making with the fruits of your labor? Are you even making a moral statement there? Or are you just simply chasing earthly gains, hoping that God will help it work out in the end? Bitcoin, whether you agree with it or not, is a moral claim. It says fixed supply matters, rules without rulers matters, sound money matters, and long-term thinking matters. To concentrate your savings is to speak clearly. To diversify endlessly is to often whisper nothing. Now let's take a look at several examples from Scripture. One of the most striking patterns in the Bible is this. Biblical heroes do not hedge their obedience. They go all in. When God calls Abraham in Genesis 12, he does not give him a diversified plan. God does not say, yeah, keep property in just in case. Make sure you maintain trade relationships back home and set up a fallback option if the promise doesn't work out. Instead, God says something radical. Go from your country, your people, and your father's household to the land I will show you. Abraham's wealth, identity, social capital, and safety were all tied to Ur. From a modern risk management perspective, leaving was reckless. Abraham liquidated the entirety of his old life and concentrated his focus into a promise which he could not yet see. Hebrews 11 tells us that Abraham went out without knowing where he was going And that is not diversification. That is conviction. Now let's take a look at Moses, who potentially had one of the most diversified resumes imaginable. Born a Hebrew slave, raised as Egyptian royalty, educated in Pharaoh's court, and positioned for power. If anyone had the option to hedge between two systems, it was Moses. He could have said, I'll help my people quietly, work some reform from the inside, and I'll do some good. Yeah, I'll do some good. But again, Hebrews 11 tells us that Moses refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. Refused. That word matters. Moses divested from the greatest political and economic power on earth at the time, not because he couldn't benefit from it drastically, but because it was unjust. He chose concentration on obedience rather than compromise. He left Egypt with no safety net, no institutional backing, and no diversified plan. God does not deliver Israel through a man who hedged his identity. He delivers them through a man who chose sides. Let's take a look at Elijah in 1 Kings 18, where Israel is deeply diversified religiously. They worship Yahweh when it's convenient, but they worship Baal when it's productive. This is religious diversification at its peak. Multiple gods, multiple strategies, multiple sources of blessing. Elijah confronts this directly on Mount Carmel. He asks the people a devastating question. How long will you waver between two opinions? Not, when is it beneficial to worship Yahweh versus worship Baal? Let's come up with a diversified strategy here. Elijah doesn't propose coexistence. He forces concentration. One God, one altar, one sacrifice, one fire. When God answers with fire, it's not just a miracle. It's a rebuke of diversification masquerading as wisdom. God honors clarity here and concentration, not hedging. Lastly, my favorite one, and perhaps the most applicable, the story of David and Goliath. When David arrives at the battlefield, Saul tries to help him by offering him armor. From a human perspective, this is wise. This is diversification. This is risk management, redundancy, a backup plan. But David rejects it. Why? Because it interferes with his primary strategy. David said he cannot move freely in Saul's armor. It's not what God trained him with. It's not aligned with his calling. Also, David doesn't bring a sword of his own. He doesn't bring any backup weapons just in case. He brings a sling and 5 smooth stones. That's it. That's the strategy. From a modern investing perspective, this is reckless. But from a biblical perspective, this is clarity. David wins the battle with his sling, and only after victory is secured, he finishes the job with Goliath's own sword. The sword was not the strategy. It was the cleanup. It was a reward. This is crucial. David did not diversify to protect from a lack of faith. He concentrated on obedience and the primary strategy. Diversification often masquerades as wisdom, but frequently it's simply a comfort-seeking behavior. It allows us to avoid being wrong in public, to avoid standing alone, and it allows us to say, well, I had some exposure, but biblical faith does not reward partial commitment. Jesus says you cannot serve 2 masters. He does not say you can serve one master mostly while also hedging with another. This doesn't mean Christians should be reckless, emotional, or irresponsible, but it does mean that true stewardship requires discernment and concentration, not endless dispersion. If Bitcoin truly represents the hardest, fairest, most transparent form of money ever created, then concentration on it is not greed. It's coherence to a moral outlook. And if it turns out to be wrong, at least the position and the intentions behind taking the position were honest. The question is not, is diversification bad? The question is, what are you actually saying with your diversification? Does it say you trust truth, God's order, or man's heavily financialized systems? Do you believe truth exists, or is everything just probabilities? Does it say you have conviction, or are you afraid to be wrong? The heroes of the Bible were not diversified in their obedience. They might have been diversified in their outcomes, but all of them put heavy concentration into their faith. Maybe the deeper challenge that Bitcoin presents to Christians isn't financial at all. Maybe it's this. Are we willing to align our money with our convictions or only our comfort? Because in the end, money speaks. And Scripture reminds us that God is listening. Thank you.